In a quiet village surrounded by green fields and tall trees, there lived a simple farmer named Hiroshi. Every morning, Hiroshi would wake up before the sun, stretch his tired body and step out of his small wooden house. The smell of wet soil and fresh grass greeted him like an old friend. His farm was small, but it was enough to feed his family. He had a few cows, some chickens, and a tiny vegetable patch where he grew potatoes, carrots, and cabbage. Hiroshi was not a rich man. He did not own many tools and he had no soldiers to protect him. What he did have was a strong heart, a sharp mind, and a deep love for his land. Villagers often saw him walking slowly through his fields, humming a soft tune while checking on his crops. They admired his calm nature, his gentle smile, and the way he treated every living thing on his farm as if it were part of his family. Every day followed the same peaceful rhythm. The rooster would crow, signaling the start of another day. Hiroshi would milk his cows, feed the chickens, and water his plants. He would repair the fences when they broke and fix the tools when they wore out. In the evenings, after a long day of work, he would sit outside his house, watching the orange sun dip behind the hills, and enjoy the quiet sound of nature. Life was simple and he loved it that way. But as peaceful as life seemed, there was a shadow growing in the distance. Hiroshi did not know it yet, but the world beyond his village was changing. Far away, planes filled the sky, and nations were preparing for a war that would reach even the smallest villages. Soldiers were training, weapons were being built, and strategies were being planned. Hiroshi's world of calm fields and gentle animals was about to be shaken in ways he could never imagine. One morning, as Hiroshi walked along the edge of his farm, he noticed a strange sound in the sky. It was faint at first, almost like the hum of a distant bee, but it grew louder and faster. Hiroshi paused and looked up. High above, the sky was empty and blue, but the sound made him uneasy. He shook his head and thought maybe it's just the wind. But deep inside he felt a strange worry. Hiroshi returned to his chores, trying to focus on feeding the animals. But the sound stayed in his mind. He could not stop thinking about it. Later that day he saw something unusual. Smoke appeared on the horizon, rising in thin, dark lines. He squinted against the sun and saw shapes moving fast through the air. Plants. Not the kind he had ever seen. These were fast, sharp, and deadly. His heart skipped a beat. Hiroshi had heard stories of war from travelers passing through, but he had never imagined it would reach his small village. The villagers were frightened too. People started whispering about soldiers, battles, and destruction. They spoke of Japanese Zeros, planes known to be unstoppable in the skies. But Hiroshi, like everyone else, could not understand how one man, just a simple farmer, could possibly face such danger. It seemed impossible. And yet Hiroshi felt a strange calm. He looked at his fields, his animals, and the little house where his family lived, and he knew he could not run. He had to protect what he loved. Days went by and the sounds of war grew closer. Hiroshi continued his daily work, but now every moment felt tense. Every rustle of the leaves, every shadow on the ground made him jump. At night, when he lay down to sleep, he could hear the faint drone of engines far away. Sleep came slowly, filled with uneasy dreams of planes and fire. The simple life he knew was slipping away, replaced by a storm he could not yet see. Despite the fear, Hiroshi's mind began to turn. He started thinking, what can one farmer do against the sky full of enemy planes? It seemed hopeless. But there was a fire in his heart. He refused to accept that he was powerless. Something inside him whispered that he could make a difference. Not with armies, not with weapons, but with cleverness, courage, and determination. No one in the village suspected what was about to happen. To them, Hiroshi was just a quiet farmer living an ordinary life. But Hiroshi was about to do something extraordinary. Something that would shock everyone and change the course of the war in ways no one could have imagined. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows over his fields, Hiroshi stood at the edge of his farm, looking up at the sky. The hum of distant planes was louder now. His heart pounded, not with fear but with a strange anticipation. The ordinary farmer, who spent his days tending crops and feeding animals, was about to face an impossible challenge. And no one, not even Hiroshi himself, knew just how far his courage and cleverness would take him. No one knew this quiet farmer was about to change the course of a war. The morning began like any other, with the sun rising slowly over the green hills. Hiroshi walked through his fields, checking his crops, feeding the chickens, and milking the cows. The village seemed peaceful, almost untouched by the chaos of the world beyond. But the calm was only an illusion. Far above, in the bright blue sky, shadows moved. Shadows that carried fire and death. At first, the villagers thought it was just the wind or maybe a flock of birds. But soon the low hum of engines became impossible to ignore. Hiroshi froze, the bucket in his hand half full of milk. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, fast, mechanical, and relentless. He looked up and saw them. Planes. Dozens of sleek, silver machines with sharp wings slicing through the sky. They moved quickly, almost too fast for the eye to follow. Hiroshi's heart pounded in his chest. He recognized them from the stories he had heard, the Japanese Zeros, planes designed for war, swift and deadly. A wave of fear ran through him, but he did not run. He could not. The first plane swooped down over the village and the world seemed to explode in chaos. Houses shook from the roar of engines. Smoke rose from distant fires. Chickens scattered in every direction, squawking in panic. Villagers screamed, some running for cover, others frozen in shock. The sound of explosions echoed through the hills, bouncing off the trees and the walls of the small houses. Hiroshi grabbed his tools, not knowing exactly what he would do. He had no weapons, no armor, and no soldiers to help him. He was just a farmer, an ordinary man, yet he felt something shift inside him. Fear was there, yes, but so was determination. He looked around at the village, at his family, at his small wooden house surrounded by fields he had worked so hard to care for. He could not let this destruction continue. The planes circled again, faster this time. The villagers were running in every direction, some trying to hide behind fences, others diving into the nearby forest. Hiroshi stayed still for a moment, his eyes tracing the flight paths of the enemy planes. He noticed something others didn't. The planes moved in a pattern. They repeated the same maneuvers every time they attacked. It was subtle, almost impossible to see, but Hiroshi's sharp eyes caught it. He realized in that moment that there might be a way to fight back. Not with guns or bombs, he had none, but with something else. Something clever. Something unexpected. He did not know yet what it would be, but the seed of an idea began to form. The second wave of Zeros came, closer now. Flames erupted from one house as the plane passed overhead. Hiroshi ducked behind a small haystack, watching the destruction unfold. The wind from the plane's engines ripped through the fields, flattening crops and sending dust into the air. Hiroshi could smell smoke and burnt wood. He could hear the screams of his neighbors. The reality of war had arrived at his doorstep. But as panic spread, Hiroshi's mind worked faster than ever. He began imagining ways to turn his farm into a trap. His tools, his animals, even the landscape itself could be used to confuse the planes. A pile of hay here, a hidden ditch there, a sudden movement in the fields, it all could be part of something bigger. He did not know exactly how it would work yet, but he understood one thing clearly. He had to act, and he had to act fast. Another plane appeared, diving toward the village at terrifying speed. Hiroshi froze for a moment, fear gripping his chest. Then instinct took over. He jumped into the nearest ditch, clutching a wooden pole like a shield. The plane's shadow passed over him, darkening the ground for a brief, terrifying second. The roar of the engine made his ears ring. When it passed, the world seemed to hold its breath. Hiroshi looked around. The village was in chaos. Fires burned in the distance, smoke curling into the sky. Children cried, women screamed, and men tried desperately to protect their homes. The Japanese Zeros moved with frightening precision, yet Hiroshi noticed that they were predictable. Their patterns repeated, their movements could be studied. And if something could be studied, it could be defeated. He remembered the stories he had heard as a child, tales of clever people outsmarting stronger enemies with wit rather than force. Hiroshi realized that perhaps he could do the same. He could not stop all the planes, not alone, but maybe he could make a difference. Maybe he could take down just one, and then another, and then, who knew how many? The third wave came, faster and more aggressive. Hiroshi's heart raced, but he did not move yet. He was watching, learning, waiting. The villagers fled, leaving their homes and fields behind. Hiroshi felt a strange calm amidst the chaos. His hands tightened around the wooden pole. His eyes followed every plane, noting its speed, its angle, its shadow on the ground. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and Hiroshi could feel it. He took a deep breath. The ordinary farmer, who had spent his life tending crops and caring for animals, was now facing a force that seemed impossible to defeat. Yet he did not give up. Not yet. He had no weapons, no army, and no experience in battle, but he had something stronger. A mind that could think faster than the planes could fly, and a courage that would not let him turn away. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, glinting off the silver wings of the enemy planes, Hiroshi made a silent promise to himself. He would protect his home. He would defend his village. And somehow, he would fight back. No one in the village knew it yet. But the quiet farmer, the man who seemed ordinary in every way, was about to do something that would shock the world. Something that no one could have imagined. The war had arrived. And Hiroshi, the farmer, was about to face it like no one ever had before. Days passed, but the village never returned to peace. The hum of distant planes was now a constant presence, a reminder that the Japanese Zeros could strike at any moment. Villagers hid inside their homes or fled to the forests, leaving behind their fields, their animals, and their dreams. Only Hiroshi remained, moving quietly through his farm, his eyes scanning the sky with a focus that no ordinary farmer could have imagined. Hiroshi was exhausted. Sleep had become a luxury and food was barely enough to keep him going. Yet, despite the fear and chaos, his mind was sharp. He noticed patterns in the enemy attacks that no one else seemed to see. The Zeros always approached from the same angle, always made the same swooping dive over the village, and always turned back the same way. Small details, almost invisible, but Hiroshi's keen eyes caught them. He began to think, if I know their pattern, maybe I can use it, maybe I can turn it against them. The thought was dangerous, almost impossible, but it sparked a fire inside him. Hiroshi's hands, worn and calloused from years of farm work, clenched into fists. He would not run. He would not hide. He would fight, not with guns or bombs but with his mind, with cleverness. Hiroshi started experimenting quietly. He placed small objects in his fields, stones, broken carts, even a few logs, and watched how shadows moved in the sunlight. He observed the way the planes reflected the sun, the speed of their dives, and the way the wind carried sound. Every day he learned something new. Every day the pieces of a larger plan came together in his mind. At first it seemed impossible. How could one man with no weapons and no soldiers stop the Zeros? Hiroshi thought about it long and hard, pacing the length of his fields under the moonlight. He drew sketches in the dirt with a stick, testing ideas over and over. If a plane dives too low here, if a trap is hidden there. Each scenario was carefully imagined. Each possibility was considered. Slowly a plan began to take shape. It was simple yet brilliant. It used the land itself, the tools he already had, and the animals he cared for. Hiroshi realized he could create traps that would confuse the planes, slow them down, and maybe even damage them. It was dangerous, yes, but it was possible. And it was the only chance he had. Hiroshi's first attempt was small. He set up a row of haystacks along the edge of the field where the planes usually swooped. He scattered stones and old tools to create shadows that looked like obstacles from the air. He moved slowly, testing everything, imagining how the Zeros would react. His heart raced as he worked, because he knew even a small mistake could cost him his life. The first plane approached as predicted. Hiroshi watched from behind a hill, holding his breath. The plane swooped down, its shadow racing over the ground. It passed over the haystacks and stones exactly as Hiroshi had imagined. Something clicked in his mind, the trap worked. The plane hesitated, slightly thrown off by the shadows, the obstacles. Hiroshi could hardly believe it. One plane had been affected by his simple, clever idea. Encouraged, Hiroshi refined his plan. He added small mirrors to reflect the sunlight, creating flashes that could blind the pilots for a second. He dug shallow ditches to create shadows that looked like trenches or obstacles from above. He moved quickly, quietly, always thinking several steps ahead. The farm became a maze of clever illusions, all designed to confuse the enemy planes. Despite the danger, Hiroshi began to feel a strange thrill. Each day brought new challenges, new waves of planes, and new opportunities to test his plan. The villagers whispered about the quiet farmer who refused to leave his fields. Some thought he was foolish, others thought he was brave. Hiroshi did not care what they thought. All that mattered was protecting his home, his family, and his land. At night, after the planes had gone, Hiroshi would sit outside his house, looking at the stars. He thought about the lives lost in the village, about the families who had fled, and about the impossible odds he faced. Yet he never doubted himself. He had something more powerful than fear, more powerful than weapons. He had intelligence, courage, and determination. And with those, he could do what no one expected. The days passed, and Hiroshi's traps became more sophisticated. He used his knowledge of the fields, the trees, and even the animals to his advantage. Chickens became decoys, cows created shadows, and trees masked the movement of his traps. Each step was carefully calculated. Each plane became a test, and each success brought him closer to something extraordinary. Yet the real test was still ahead. Hiroshi knew that one clever trap was not enough. To truly make a difference, he would have to outsmart dozens of planes, each one faster and more deadly than the last. The thought was terrifying but also exhilarating. He had discovered a power he never knew he had, the power to fight back even against impossible odds. And so, Hiroshi continued to prepare. The quiet farmer, who had once spent his days tending crops and caring for animals, was now a strategist, a thinker, a warrior of the skies. His farm had become his battlefield, and his mind had become his weapon. The villagers still whispered about him, not knowing the extraordinary plan forming in his mind. No one could imagine what a single ordinary farmer was about to accomplish. But Hiroshi knew. He could see the pieces falling into place, and he knew that soon, very soon, his clever trick would be tested. And when that moment came, the world would watch in shock as an ordinary man did something extraordinary. The farmer's idea was ready. And soon it would change everything. The day began with an unusual tension in the air. Hiroshi walked through his fields with careful steps, scanning every inch of his land. The haystacks were in place, the stones scattered, the ditches dug, and the mirrors positioned just so. Everything was ready. The ordinary farmer, who had spent years tending crops and animals, was about to attempt something no one had ever imagined. Hiroshi paused at the edge of his field, looking up at the bright, clear sky. The sun reflected off the mirrors he had set, creating small flashes of light that danced across the ground. He held his breath, his heart pounding. Today his clever plan would be tested. For the first time he would see if one man could really outsmart the deadly Japanese Zeros. The distant hum of engines made Hiroshi's body tense. He knew the sound well now. It was a signal that danger was near, but also that the time for action had come. He crouched behind a low hill, keeping himself hidden, and watched the horizon. And then he saw it. A silver dot appeared in the sky, growing larger and faster. One plane. Just one to start. Hiroshi's pulse quickened. This was it. His first real test. The plane swooped down, following the same path it had taken every day. Hiroshi's eyes tracked it carefully. As it passed over the haystacks, he held his breath. Would the plane notice the traps? Would his plan work, or would it fail in an instant? The plane hesitated. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, it wavered in the air. The shadows of the ditches and the scattered tools confused the pilot. The reflections from the mirrors flashed in the sun, blinding him for just a second. That small second was enough. The plane tilted slightly, almost as if it were about to hit the ground. Hiroshi could hardly believe his eyes. His plan was working. He stayed hidden, watching every move. The plane corrected itself and continued, but the hesitation had disrupted its path. Hiroshi's heart leaped. One plane, affected by a simple farmer's clever trap. No guns, no soldiers, just his mind and his farm. Encouraged, Hiroshi adjusted a few things in his setup. He moved some stones, shifted a haystack slightly, and positioned the mirrors to catch the sunlight better. He had learned from the first plane what worked and what needed improvement. His mind raced with new possibilities. If one plane could be affected, then maybe two, maybe three, maybe more. The second plane came next. Faster, sharper, more aggressive. Hiroshi watched every movement, every shadow, every reflection. The plane swooped down, and this time Hiroshi's trap worked even better. The pilot misjudged the shadows, tilting the plane unexpectedly. Dust rose from the field as the plane flew dangerously low. Hiroshi's pulse raced. He felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was more than farming. This was strategy, survival, and courage all rolled into one. Hiroshi didn't celebrate yet. He knew the first attempt was just the beginning. The real challenge would come when multiple planes attacked together. But for now, this small victory was enough to give him hope. Hope that one man could stand against impossible odds, and maybe, just maybe, make a difference. As the day went on, Hiroshi tested his traps with more planes. Each one was slightly different, requiring adjustments, quick thinking, and careful timing. The first attempt had proven his idea, but it also taught him valuable lessons. He realized that even a small mistake could be fatal. A misaligned mirror, a misplaced stone, or a shadow in the wrong spot could ruin everything. Every detail mattered. Despite the danger, Hiroshi felt a thrill he had never known before. The ordinary farmer had become a strategist, a thinker, a warrior. Every movement of the planes was now a puzzle to solve. Every shadow, reflection, and obstacle was a tool in his hands. And with each passing hour, his confidence grew. By evening, the planes had left, retreating for the day. Hiroshi stood in the middle of his fields, looking at the results. Some traps had worked perfectly, some needed adjustments, but overall he had succeeded. One man, using his wits and the land he loved, had affected the enemy planes. He returned to his house, exhausted but determined. He knew this was only the beginning. The real battle would test his courage, patience, and cleverness like never before. Yet for the first time he felt a spark of hope. He could fight back. He could protect his home. He could make a difference. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, Hiroshi made a quiet promise to himself. He would continue to improve his traps. He would learn from every attack. He would face every plane with courage and cunning. And one day he would do something that no one would ever forget. A farmer taking on the deadly Zeros and winning. The ordinary farmer had made his first move. The world had no idea what was coming next. One attempt had shown the power of cleverness. But the war was far from over. The sun rose over the village, painting the fields in gold and green. Hiroshi stood at the edge of his farm, staring at the horizon. Days of planning, observing, and testing had led to this moment. He had survived the first waves, learned the patterns of the enemy, and successfully tested his traps. But today he would reveal the full scale of his plan. A plan so daring, so clever that no one could have imagined it. Hiroshi's mind was calm, though his heart raced. He walked through the fields, checking every stone, haystack, and mirror. Each piece of his puzzle had a purpose. Each shadow, each reflection, was part of a carefully calculated design. The farm, which once fed animals and grew vegetables, had become a battlefield shaped by his mind and his courage. The first plane appeared far in the distance, a silver dot against the bright sky. Hiroshi crouched behind a small hill, his eyes following every movement. As the plane swooped closer, it passed over the haystacks and ditches he had set up. But this time something new happened. The mirrors caught the sunlight and reflected a blinding flash directly into the pilot's eyes. The shadows of the ditches made the ground look uneven, as if traps were hidden everywhere. The plane wavered, almost losing control. Hiroshi's breath caught in his throat. He had done it. His full trick, the combination of mirrors, shadows, ditches, and carefully placed obstacles, was working exactly as he had imagined. One ordinary farmer had turned his simple farm into a weapon that could confuse and disable enemy planes. Hiroshi had not done this by chance. He had studied the enemy's every movement, calculated the angles, and used the environment to his advantage. He had turned the sky into a battlefield and the land beneath it into a trap. It was risky, dangerous, and nearly impossible, yet it worked. The first plane, disoriented and shaken, veered off course and crashed into the field beyond. Hiroshi could hardly believe his eyes. One plane down, and it was all because of his clever, daring idea. Encouraged by this success, Hiroshi adjusted his traps for the next plane. He had learned from each attempt, refining the placement of shadows, the angles of mirrors, and the position of ditches. Every detail mattered. The enemy planes were fast and deadly, but Hiroshi's mind was faster. Each movement, each reflection, each shadow had a purpose. It was a perfect balance of observation, creativity, and courage. The second plane came faster and Hiroshi's traps worked even better. The mirrors reflected blinding sunlight directly into the pilot's eyes, causing hesitation. The shadows and ditches created the illusion of obstacles where there were none. The pilot, confused and disoriented, struggled to maintain control. Hiroshi's heart pounded as he watched the plane falter and crash into the field. 2 planes gone, and the villagers could hardly believe what they were seeing. Hiroshi's trick was no longer a simple experiment. It had become a weapon, a force that one man could use against an enemy far stronger than himself. The village had never seen anything like it. People whispered in awe about the quiet farmer who had outsmarted the deadly Zeros, but Hiroshi stayed focused. He knew the war was far from over and the real test was still ahead. Over the next few days, Hiroshi's plan evolved. He added new elements to his traps. Small piles of stones to mimic anti-aircraft guns, chickens running in the fields to create sudden movement, and more mirrors to catch the sunlight at different angles. The farm became a living battlefield, with every detail carefully calculated to confuse and destroy the enemy. The Japanese Zeros returned, wave after wave, faster and more aggressive each time. But Hiroshi was ready. His first trick had revealed the potential of his plan, and now he was confident in its full power. Each plane that approached was met with shadows, reflections, and illusions that disoriented the pilots. Each attack became a test, and Hiroshi passed every one. By the end of the first week, the village had begun to notice the results. Stories spread quickly, planes crashing in the fields, pilots thrown off course by invisible obstacles, and one ordinary farmer who seemed to control the skies. The villagers whispered his name in awe and disbelief. Hiroshi had done something impossible. He had turned fear into courage, chaos into strategy, and a simple farm into a deadly weapon. Yet Hiroshi remained humble. He did not seek fame or praise. He knew the war was far from over, and the Zeros would return in greater numbers. He also knew that even the cleverest plan required constant attention and adjustment. Every day brought new challenges, new waves of enemy planes, and new opportunities to refine his strategy. As night fell, Hiroshi stood in the middle of his fields, looking up at the stars. He thought about the planes he had defeated, the patterns he had discovered, and the clever trap he had perfected. But he also thought about the days ahead. More planes would come, more challenges would appear, and he would need all of his courage, skill, and intelligence to survive. The farmer's trick was no longer just a test. It was a full strategy, a plan that had already begun to change the course of the war. One ordinary man had done the extraordinary. One simple farm had become a battlefield. And one farmer, armed with nothing but courage and intelligence, had begun to outsmart the deadly Japanese Zeros. The crazy trick had been revealed. And now, the world would witness the power of a single determined mind against impossible odds. The sun rose again over the village, casting long shadows across the fields Hiroshi had transformed into a battlefield. The air was thick with tension. Every leaf, every shadow, every glint of sunlight on the mirrors he had placed seemed alive, waiting for the next wave of enemy planes. Hiroshi moved silently, checking the placement of every obstacle, every ditch, every reflection. His heart beat fast, but his mind was calm, precise, and alert. The first plane appeared far on the horizon, a tiny silver dot against the bright blue sky. But this time it was not alone. Behind it came dozens more, their engines screaming like a swarm of angry bees. The Japanese Zeros had returned, faster, stronger, and more aggressive than ever. Hiroshi crouched behind a haystack, watching as the sky darkened with their approach. The village seemed frozen in fear, every person holding their breath as the planes drew closer. Hiroshi's traps, which had worked for a single plane, were now being tested on a scale he had never imagined. The mirrors flashed sunlight in precise angles, dazzling the pilots. Shadows and ditches made the ground appear dangerous, confusing their eyes. Stones and logs created the illusion of obstacles that were not really there. But the planes were relentless. They swooped low, dipped sharply, and circled with deadly precision. One mistake, one misjudgment, and Hiroshi could be lost. The first plane in the wave hesitated over the ditches and shadows, just as Hiroshi had predicted. The pilot tried to adjust, but the reflections of the mirrors blinded him for a second too long. The plane wobbled, almost losing control, and then crashed into the distant field with a violent explosion. Hiroshi exhaled slowly. One down. The beginning of the battle. But there was no time to rest. More planes came, faster and more aggressive. Hiroshi adjusted his traps on the fly, moving mirrors, shifting stones, and guiding his animals to create movement in the fields. Each plane brought new danger but also new information. Hiroshi learned from every attack, adapting his strategy, staying one step ahead of the pilots. The villagers watched from behind broken walls and fences, whispering in awe. How could one man, an ordinary farmer, stand against such a powerful enemy? But Hiroshi did not pause to think about them. His eyes were fixed on the planes, analyzing, predicting, and acting. The ordinary farm had become a living battlefield, and Hiroshi was its commander. As the battle continued, Hiroshi noticed that the enemy planes were beginning to anticipate his tricks. Some planes tried to avoid the mirrors, others adjusted to the shadows. But Hiroshi was ready. He had prepared layers of deception, secondary traps, hidden mirrors, false shadows, that the pilots could not predict. Each wave of planes met new challenges, new obstacles, and new surprises. By midday, the battle had reached its peak. The sky above the village was filled with silver machines, diving, swooping, and circling. Hiroshi moved like a shadow across his fields, guiding his traps, adjusting mirrors, and creating illusions that made the ground appear alive. Dust rose from the fields, shadows shifted unnaturally, and flashes of sunlight blinded the pilots at every turn. It was chaos, but it was a chaos Hiroshi controlled. Planes crashed, veered off course, and hesitated in midair. Hiroshi's heart raced with each success, but he knew the danger was far from over. He had to stay alert. One mistake, one moment of hesitation could destroy everything. Yet, with every wave he overcame, his confidence grew. One man, armed with nothing but his mind and the land he loved, was holding back an entire force of deadly machines. The villagers began to whisper his name with awe, the quiet farmer who could stop the Zeros. They watched as planes fell from the sky, one after another, and they could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Hiroshi, however, did not seek praise. He was focused, driven by the need to protect his home, his family, and his village. Every crash, every disoriented plane, every success was a step closer to survival. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and red, the battle did not end. Waves of planes continued, and Hiroshi continued to adapt. He moved mirrors, dug deeper ditches, and shifted obstacles to confuse the pilots. His clever trap had grown into a complex system, one that could outsmart even the most skilled enemy. By nightfall, the village was quiet again, the enemy planes having retreated for the day. Fires smoldered in the distance, but the farm and Hiroshi had survived. One ordinary man had held back an army of Zeros, using only his intelligence, courage, and careful planning. Hiroshi stood in the middle of his fields looking up at the sky. Exhausted but determined, he knew that tomorrow the planes would return, stronger and more numerous. But he also knew that he had discovered a power he had never imagined, the power to fight back, to outsmart, and to protect. The battle had intensified and the stakes had never been higher. Yet Hiroshi was ready. The ordinary farmer had become something extraordinary, a strategist, a warrior, and a hero. And though the war was far from over, he had already proven that courage, intelligence, and determination could challenge even the most deadly enemy. The battle had intensified, but Hiroshi's clever mind and daring heart would not fail. The legend of the farmer and his unstoppable trick was only just beginning. The sun rose once more over the village, but this day was different. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the fields of Hiroshi's farm seemed to hum with silent energy. Weeks of preparation, observation, and strategy had brought him to this moment. Every ditch, every shadow, every mirror, every carefully placed stone was now part of a single extraordinary plan. The quiet farmer was about to face the ultimate test of courage, intelligence, and ingenuity. In the distance, the faint hum of engines began. One by one, the Japanese Zeros appeared on the horizon, glinting silver in the morning sun. Hiroshi crouched behind a low hill, his eyes tracking every plane with precision. His traps had been tested in earlier waves, and now the final challenge had arrived. This was no longer an experiment. This was the full battle. The moment when his clever tricks would have to triumph over deadly, relentless machines. The first wave swooped low over his fields. Hiroshi's mirrors reflected blinding flashes of sunlight, forcing the pilots to shield their eyes. Shadows of ditches and logs created illusions of hidden trenches, obstacles that were not really there. The first plane hesitated, faltered, and then crashed violently into the field beyond. Hiroshi exhaled slowly, but he knew there was no time for celebration. There were more planes coming, faster and more aggressive. One by one, the Zeros fell into Hiroshi's traps. Each plane was disoriented, confused, and sometimes damaged by the illusions he had created. Stones scattered across the fields, mirrors flashed at just the right angles, and shadows made the land seem unpredictable. Even the pilots with the most experience could not anticipate the clever tricks of the ordinary farmer. By midday, the battle had reached a fever pitch. Planes dove, climbed, circled, and tried to adapt, but Hiroshi was always one step ahead. His mind worked faster than any engine, faster than any pilot could react. Every movement, every flash, every shadow was calculated with precision. And slowly, methodically, one by one, the planes began to fall. The villagers, hidden behind fences and walls, watched in disbelief. Fires burned in the distance, smoke curling into the sky, but their hearts swelled with hope. One man, a simple farmer, was holding back an entire fleet of deadly Japanese Zeros. Some whispered prayers, some could not believe their eyes, but all watched in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. Hiroshi did not pause. He moved across the fields with careful steps, adjusting mirrors, shifting stones, and guiding the shadows of the ditches. His plan was a living thing, changing with every move of the planes. The ordinary farm had become a battlefield, and Hiroshi was its master. By late afternoon, the final waves approached. Only a few planes remained, their pilots now cautious and nervous. Hiroshi's traps had already claimed the majority of the fleet. The remaining planes dived low, trying to avoid the illusions, but Hiroshi had anticipated this. Small adjustments, quick movements, and sudden flashes of sunlight disoriented the pilots. The last Zeros wavered, faltered, and one by one they crashed into the fields or retreated in defeat. Hiroshi stood in the middle of his fields, exhausted but triumphant. 26 Japanese Zeros had been destroyed in just 44 days, and it was all because of one ordinary farmer's courage, intelligence, and determination. He had faced impossible odds, and against every expectation he had won. The village was safe, for now, but the legend of the farmer and his incredible trick would be remembered forever. The villagers slowly emerged from hiding, whispering in awe. They could not believe what they had witnessed. The quiet man who had tended crops, fed animals, and lived a simple life had done something extraordinary. He had turned his farm into a battlefield and his mind into a weapon. And in doing so, he had shown that courage and intelligence could triumph over even the deadliest enemy. Hiroshi looked around at his fields, the haystacks, the ditches, the stones and the mirrors, and felt a quiet pride. He had done what no one thought possible. One man had changed the course of events with cleverness, determination, and a refusal to give up. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the fields, Hiroshi finally allowed himself a moment to rest. His body was tired, his hands were sore, but his mind was calm. The plains were gone, the village was safe, and one man's extraordinary courage had left a mark that no one could ever forget. And even though Hiroshi was just a simple farmer, the world would remember him. They would remember the ordinary man who outsmarted the deadly Japanese Zeros, who turned a farm into a battlefield, and who proved that intelligence, courage and determination could change the course of history. 44 days. 26 plains. One farmer. A legend was born.